So for those of you I haven't met, my name is Jessica Fern. I am the Director of Global Health Impact here at CanWatch. I had the opportunity to lead CanWatch's initiative, the Canadian Collaborative for Global Health, which is going to be the kind of backbone of our conversation today. Some of you I know have joined us for some of the previous conversations that we've had in this dialogue series. Some of you are joining us for the first time. But for those of you who haven't heard about the Canadian Collaborative or for Global Health, or the Collaborative, as we call it for short, this was established in 2018 to bring together diverse stakeholders to tackle what they've identified as being urgent challenges in regards to data and global health and gender equality, and to propose innovative solutions to those challenges. On our website that's been shared in the chat, you can see the details of the individual contributions of each of the 6 labs. Please check them out. And we'll be sharing the information on some of the specific labs that we'll reference today a little bit later on. And we have on our website as well past recordings of the work of some of these labs. There are lots of great outputs where you can read about the specific work that each lab was involved in. But right now we're in a series of critical dialogues where we're bringing together multiple labs to talk about overarching issues that have kind of spanned multiple projects and that have really raised some interesting questions about how we work and how we innovate. And so today we're going to be really focusing on this question of partnerships, which was a central part of the collaborative as an initiative. Intersectional partnerships are something that we often aspire to be a part of. We certainly, say that they are important. Funders frequently request that we enter into them, but these don't just happen well. We've all, I think, all been and participated in partnerships that haven't gone as well as they could have. Why is that? And within the concept of the collaborative, we have this thesis that says, kind of in the traditional models that say everybody find a partner and people scramble and kind of create partnerships. Sometimes these work, but a lot of times they're challenged. And we want to look at, what can we do to set ourselves up for success, particularly when we are talking about intersectoral partnerships and people who come from a range of different backgrounds and bring different resources and different expertise. Why might we struggle? How might we address that? I do want to acknowledge that today there's so many ways we could go with this discussion, and we are focusing on Canadian partners because we know that reflects the audience that's here today. So organizations that come from a Canadian civil society group, a Canadian research institution in particular, but others as well. However, that's only one part of the conversation, and I do hope we'll get a bit of time today to talk about our relationship with our global partners and to kind of set the stage for some future conversations there. Before I introduce our many great contributors today, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that screen fatigue is real. We all attend a lot of different online conversations these days. So we've decided that today's dialogue is really going to be a dialogue where we'll focus on hearing from each other. That means that there won't be a lot of slides. In fact, there won't be any slides. So you can give your eyes a break if you want. You can listen while you go get some fresh air, or of course you're welcome to stay and look at our lovely faces. Both options are good. So if I were to give you the full bios of everybody here, that would be the webinar. But I do want to make sure before we dive in that you know whose voices you are hearing. So in alphabetical order by last name, we are joined today by the following brilliant experts in our field. We have Colin Beckworth. He is the Technical Advisor of Nutrition Surveillance at Nutrition International. Charles Larson. He is the Interim Director, McGill University Global Health Programs, and the National Coordinator at the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research. We have Katrina Plamondon. She is the assistant professor at the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, as well as co-chair of the CCGHR University Advisory Council. Next, we have Victoria Sauveplan. She is the project manager and research associate at the University of Toronto. We have Dan Sellen. He is the director of the Lawson Center for Child Nutrition at the University of Toronto, where he is also a professor in the departments of anthropology, nutritional science, and the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. We have Vivian Welch. She is the editor-in-chief of the Campbell Collaboration. And last and never least, we have Sarah Wooler. She is the Senior Technical Advisor for Nutrition Information Systems at Nutrition International. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to start us off with some questions. I will direct it to certain people just to make sure we hear from everybody. But this is a conversation, so folks are welcome to jump in and share their expertise. But I'm going to start us off, Charles. I'm going to start us off by directing the first question to you. We titled this session "A Successful Marriage," and because we think of partnerships as how do we make them successful, but the work of your lab has asked us or challenged us on this. Is success really the goal, the main goal we should be aiming for when it comes to partnerships? So in thinking about the work of your lab, what are some of the principles of equitable partnership, and how do these get measured?
Merci, Jessica. Bonjour à tous. Je vais parler en anglais.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to all of you. If you have any questions in French, please go ahead, and I will speak English.
Successful marriages, but moving on to partnerships, our lab, the goal of our lab was partnership equity. And I think it's important for everybody to understand equity is a concept that is used a lot. It's espoused a great deal, but often we don't take the time to sit down and think about what does that mean? What is it all about? And I think it is very important that you do that with your partners and you understand what their meaning is. Do they in fact value it, and how would they use it? I think it's also, I would like to say, and I say this for myself in particular, equity is very much a learning process for me. I don't reach a point where I think I've achieved success. It's something where I learn every week something new in my interactions in partnerships, and hopefully improve my performance as an equitable partner. But it's something that is ongoing and very much based on dialogue, listening to others, and being constructive in what we want to disclose to our partners in terms of issues that we're concerned about that do address equity. So at the end of the day, the aim of our lab was to develop a partnership tool that would assist members of a partnership individually and as a partnership as a whole, the institutions involved, to address health equity, partnership equity. I'm going to pass this on to Katrina at this point.
Sure, thanks, Charles. I'll just build a bit on what you're saying. I think any kind of partnership, really, partnerships involve some kind of a relationship connection. It's a relationship between different people, individuals who make up the partnership, and then different organizations. And all of these people and organizations are always situated in different contexts where there's differences in norms and cultures and assumptions and ideas about what counts and what matters. So the idea of success, I think, is a really tricky one because it doesn't mean the same thing to all people. I think there's an awful lot of effort to try to find ways to reduce the complexity of what makes something feel like a good partnership and feel like it is doing what it's intended to do and having a positive impact in the world. We have a desire to narrow it down to some sort of tangible, measurable outcomes, and any partnership can do that, can set their own goals and outcomes. But when it comes to equity, the reality is that because partnerships are are grounded in relationships and connections where there's these differences in culture and norms and assumptions, there's also always issues of power at play. And equity, we learned through the work that we did and through other experiences for years of doing this kind of work in trying to advance practices of equity. Equity is something that's experienced by people when they're engaged in partnering. It's an experience, and there's different things that determine whether that is an experience of equity or an experience of inequity. And there are very specific things we could pay attention to, but often we don't have a lot of clear language or words to name what is it about what's going on in this relationship that feels inequitable. And so I think that there are ways we can draw attention to it and engage in really good reflective dialogue about how things are going in different aspects of whether it's about the governance and decision making in a partnership, or whether it's about the day-to-day work, or whether it's about issues of inclusion. There are different things that we can pay attention to that actually center equity more in both the process of partnering and the relationships involved in partnering, and in the goals that we set in terms of what the partnership is supposed to be doing in whatever community or whatever setting it's trying to do something good for. So I think there's generally a lot of agreement about the ideal and the possibility of partnerships being a good thing and a good way to work together. And I think we can do a lot to pay more attention to the experience of equity of different partners, and to be really attentive to the differences in power, and to be very intentional about redistributing power and resources in ways that balance and respond to those inequities.
Thank you both. And let's take that to a very tangible level. So Colin, I'd like to bring you in. You were part of another lab and looking to, with the University of Toronto and Campbell Collaboration, who are here. So looking to your project as a specific example of the relationships that Katrina and Charles were just talking about, how did you as partners begin your working relationship together? And we'll bring in some other folks from your lab to tell, like, how did that evolve over time?
Thanks very much. Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I always, kind of think it's really fantastic when we consider, we talk about this, kind of these principles, but like, what does it mean in practice? What can we do sort of practically? And so one of the first things that we kind of instituted within our partnership was to have a quarterly face-to-face meetings and sort of build in that time together. And that I felt was really pivotal to the success that we had in our partnership. Of course, we would always have kind of agendas and outcomes that we would expect from these meetings, but we were careful to sort of also build in time that we could really just sort of like, just have those discussions and have very free-ranging discussions. And that really set up a very safe space for us all to sort of inhabit, which then sort of passed over, as we're then sort of working over email and virtually, as and all the challenges that brings. But we had that sort of foundation of a safe space within that, and so although it's it's an investment of time for us to sort of decamp from Ottawa to go down to Toronto, or vice versa for Toronto to come up here. Very much worth the effort, very much worth, kind of building in that time to sort of get to know one another. I would say that sort of, as a result of that kind of closeness of, that kind of building sort of the that kind of like team approach and that kind of like free-ranging discussion kind of approach. Probably one of the best things I could say about that is that I can genuinely say of our project, there are some ideas I can't actually remember whose they were. Because they came about so organically through that sort of, those discussions and that having that time to put in with that discussion, it almost sort of became the idea of the partnership, not the idea of one of the partners. So that, I think that's the first thing. And the other sort of big advantage that really kind of gave to us is that we really saw the similarities. Actually, there might be this kind of stereotype that somehow academia is thinkers and kind of the CSOs are doers, But that really didn't bear up in, kind of when we sort of, kind of examined it within our partnership. Myself, I worked for a CSO, and I've, kind of got a practical background, I suppose, kind of working for sort of MSF, other organizations. But in my career, I spent 5 years also working at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. So that's a, kind of academic institution. Likewise, sort of Alison and Victoria, who, we work with very closely on the, in the partnership, have also sort of passed back and forth from sort of like academia and to sort of, CSOs. And I really got the feeling that actually, if we'd have just simply put the clock back sort of, kind of a few years, or indeed maybe even forward a few years, we could definitely be actually in kind of like I could be sort of working for the academic side, and Victoria or Alison could be working for the sort of the CSO side. So I think that having that, those kind of like those stereotypes, it didn't bear up once you have got the proximity of that those kind of meetings gave us. So I think that that was really key, and it was a huge loss when, of course, COVID then came, and we could no longer sort of have those face-to-face meetings. Although we had got that, let's say that kind of established that safe place for us to sort of collaborate. So that did help us then when we could no longer sort of meet in person.
Thanks, Colin. Vivian, it was, from the perspective of maybe being in a more academic space, kind of as a counterpoint to what Colin was sharing, was that, similar to the same experience that you did? How did this relationship kind of, evolve over time?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and thanks, Colin. Well, I totally agree with Colin that the face-to-face was so important to start that relationship. I mean, a bit of history, I think, is that our three organizations were connected through loose ties, and this partnership grant brought those loose ties together. But I think the face-to-face meetings were really the glue that really got us going. And I think part of it was sharing the decision making, as Colin was saying, that you couldn't really tell where one idea began and ended, but also that went to the decisions about the budget and the timelines. Those were all shared between academics and NGOs, and I think that was really helpful in getting some common goals and being realistic. The other thing I was going to say is the face-to-face was one thing, but also Nutrition International assigned one person who unfortunately can't be with us, but Dorothy Rigo, who managed the relationship. And I think that was pretty important in our relationship. She had, I think, bi-weekly calls with each partner, but then also regular calls in between. And I think it's that regular communication, even if there's nothing to say, could be a short conversation, but it keeps that relationship that started with the face-to-face, and I think the more we have gotten used to Zoom, the more I think we found that you can continue those relationships without the regular face-to-face that we all love and miss. Yeah, I think that was those were my main thoughts. Is really the person who managed that relationship was really critical for our partnership.
Well, that's a really great segue, Victoria, to bring you in, because for University of Toronto, that was a big part of the role that you played as that role. So wondering if you want to jump into this question of how the relationships evolve over time, but maybe also adding in any thoughts you have around like the tangible investments, like the human resources like that Victoria mentioned. How in particular did that help these partnerships? What are the kind of investments that were necessary, or the resources that were necessary to make the partnership run as it did from your perspective?
Absolutely, and thank you, Vivian and Colin, for setting the stage so perfectly. I think definitely when it comes to those kind of key factors that really contributed to the successful, as we were saying, marriage or partnership or collaboration, it also comes down to the iterative approach, and also the the design of the Can Watch Lab, that we could have that creative space and throw some ideas to one another, you know, whether Vivian and the Work Campbell collaboration we're leading on compared to University of Toronto, but also throwing some ideas to one another, like, oh, did you think about this? Or what about that? And really bringing in the practicality and usability of everyone's experiences to the table, and just convening that on that regular basis. And certainly the face-to-face really helped us create that safe space, but also creative space that we worked on iteratively throughout the entire collaboration. And I think certainly that is quite unique, given that, you know, academic may have a slower per se timelines than the CSOs with tight donor timelines. And so I think that also just allowed a bit more flexibility so that we can really bring a multitude of ideas together and ultimately really see what could be most useful for NI and their country level teams when it comes to, you know, the data issues that are very common across the board in terms of gender equality and nutrition outcomes.
Thank you, Victoria. Sarah, let's hear from you on that same piece as well. From you were on the NI side of things. You know, were there other very specific, you know, tangible investments that you think made this partnership more likely to succeed, perhaps compared to some that you've been a part of?
Well, I think it was really critical for all of us to invest the time that was necessary to build a foundation of shared understanding. And I think that each partner needed to understand what the other partners were capable of, what each of us needed. And I really find there's a detriment sometimes when you're working in partnerships that one or the other might stop at assumptions. Now, we all make assumptions, but if you stop at assumption and you don't clarify it, then it can really derail everything that's happening. And prior experience can dictate what you think the other partner needs. And the whole time that we spent to understand each other's needs, to understand what it is, and to, as Colin mentioned and the others have mentioned, the open space and the freedom to actually say, no, that's not quite what we were looking for, or that's not really something that we can do. That was when magic started to happen. That was when innovation started to happen, because we could start as Victoria said, that whole iterative process of building, and that required time, that required effort, that required all of us to actually be in the meetings when we're in meetings, and not to be on our phone or our internet or thinking about other things. And that I find is just really critical.
Let's really dive into this question of assumptions, because I think that to me really struck me when we were first kind of generating the idea for the collaborative in the first place. You know, I heard a lot from various partners, and I know from my chats with you, you guys have heard this too, and it was touched on earlier, Colin. You shared this. You know, there's often assumptions that research institutions and civil society organizations have fundamentally different priorities, fundamentally different approaches, that there is an inevitable tension that is going to exist between the idea of being practical, useful, and quick, and being rigorous and robust. And there, built into that, are a lot of very negative assumptions about how we work and what we need. And yet, as has been pointed out, many of you have worn hats working at, you know, academic institutions, civil society organizations, and don't see your role necessarily as being clear cut. So let's unpack that. Where does that come from? Does that bear out in your experience? Where does that, you know, what does that do when we operate from those assumptions, and is that worth challenging? Dan, I know that you've got lots of thoughts on this, and I'd love to kind of have you share your experiences with that.
Yeah, I think for us, what we learned in this is that trying to deal with those very sort of assumptions that can create problems and hamper innovation was really front of our minds. And we really brought a number of resources in our collaborative into the mix that addressed those issues. So first of all, we had on board at our university staff researchers who had a proven track record of experience in CSOs, in nutrition and gender and program assessment. And all of us involved understood the practical challenges and the need for a certain amount of compromise and problem solving to address, bigger issues and solutions. So we never just divided up the work as this group has those deliverables, this group has those deliverables, and we sort of met at the beginning and then at the end. As others have said, we would meet over all of the issues frequently and listen carefully to, from the CSO side, and I had specific projects ongoing, specific data collection architectures that had certain limitations, some opportunities, and we would probe those and then figure out how could we build them better, strengthen, add on. Similarly, we would offer from the more creative academic side some ideas. Well, we could try this, we could try that. And because our colleagues at the CSO, at NI and CamWatch were very data-oriented thinkers, it made it easier for those of us on the academic side to be heard, to translate what we were trying to communicate. So having staff and individuals around the projects who have experience across sectors, I think was a big help for us. That was a great resource. Always focusing on pragmatic solutions and talking about them the whole way through. Having the time to do that was a great resource. And I think the last thing I would add is we also didn't focus entirely on academic outputs from our University of Toronto side. We were much more concerned that we provided sustainably good solutions that could be taken far beyond the life of our work together and would actually make change in the world. And we can add commentary and other analyses to that, but we were more interested in strengthening the programs that our CSO partner was working on than purely academic outcomes. And I think by making that type of concession, if you like, we had a much more vibrant and productive working arrangement. I would add that the funding from CanWatch was, in my experience, noticeably supportive in our ability to do more than one often can, because it gave us the, we were not underfunded, I will say that. We were able to spend staff time and work on a reasonable time budget to do a great deal in terms of understanding the issues, coming up with possible answers, coming to some dead ends, and we, in the end, were able to work really well. So not being under ridiculously tight budgetary and time pressure, I think has to be said was really noticeably helpful in the quality of where we ended up.
Dan, Colin and Vivian, I saw some nodding over there. Would you guys like to come in on this?
Vivian, would you like to go first?
I was just saying, you go ahead and then I can add to that. Yeah.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Yes, I can really only sort of echo what Dan was saying, and I think that in terms of the way that this was funded, this project was funded, was noticeably different. Often, a lot of our projects are quite linear. We set out exactly, where we're going to end up and how we're going to get there, and then we sort of monitor how we will sort of, kind of progress towards that, and it's sort of quite a straight line. I think because I think our understanding of this grant was that the process was also very, very important. That kind of gave us the ability to sort of to be a lot more creative, I think. And I think that one of the sort of the things that I really sort of take away from this project is that some of the things that we sort of identified earlier on, actually, when we all came together in a room and started sort of throwing these ideas around, we actually found that, you know, some of these things were, you know, as we sort of pulled at the threads, were actually even more important. So, for example, we had a sort of a small piece of our project that was around sort of the, you know, what do we do with our survey data, and which was to sort of, you know, kind of build an information sort of, you know, kind of architecture to sort of build that. As we started pulling on the threads of that, and we started discussing that, what we actually found that there was a really rich theme of work that we could, you know, that was actually could kind of take us off in a new direction, and the synergy that was created through the partnership really kind of you know has caused us to sort of, you know, kind of take off in a quite unexpected, you know, kind of direction. So although, you know, we had our outcomes and we achieved, you know, all of those, I think because of the way that this this partnership was funded, we did have the space to sort of, you know, to capitalize on those kind of like unexpected gains. And actually now, you know, even sort of, you know, after the project has sort of ended now, you know, we've actually got, you know, that work is really taking off and it's really spreading. And the project that I sort of mentioned about, you know, the information architecture is now spread into sort of all aspects of kind of like information architecture at NI, and our operations department, you know, immediately saw the value of it and are starting to sort of collaborate with us. So in a way, I'm almost sad that we had to sort of report on kind of on the project when we had to report on it, because I can really see, you know, kind of like the value is only continuing to add and add and add and add. And it's the same for the sort of the gender piece as well. You know, we were able to sort of, you know, kind of collect this sort of wealth of information, and it's and you know, we're only doing more and more work with it. It's only becoming more and more sort of transformative to us as an organization. So I think having that space was really important, and really took us to some unexpected and really great places.
Yeah.
If I may,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
just this, forgive me, Vivian, just a small thing I think that I noticed in addition to what everyone's saying is, you know, and Vivian may comment on this from the Ottawa side, but we, you know, at U of T, we kind of matched human resource and expertise to questions as they came up through the life of the project, rather than just allocating a team at the beginning. And what that meant is we could identify, at the beginning, many things were unclear. There was a general need, goal, set of aims, of course, but the specific resources and approaches and technical expertise needed were not so clear. And so what we didn't do was waste investments early on with assumptions. We tailored people as we went. And I was really excited that, you know, while we had a small team meeting regularly, we were at the U of T kind of like a gateway to a back-end community of all sorts of experts. And we were able to engage a lot of trainees, particularly at the graduate level, for pieces of the work. And they did very much a sort of learning by doing set of contributions to the project. And they were closely sort of managed and supervised and treated as very much shoulder-to-shoulder members of the team as they worked. So for me, that was just a wonderful way to use the kinds of unique resources that a great public research institution has, which a CSO may not. And we were able to provide real-world exposure to real-world issues and to apply thinking that helped the CSO, and that helped us at the university feel relevant and train people with real hands-on projects. So I think that was for us a very sweet spot, that way of allocating the human resource in a specific way as we went.
Vivian.
Oh yeah, I totally agree about the trainees that Dan was just saying, that we brought in trainees as needed on projects, and those trainees, you know, as Colin said, that relationship with trainees is continuing now much beyond the funding of the project. So and that includes one trainee from Kenya and 3 from here in Ottawa. So I think it's been a quite exciting part of this partnership, and it couldn't have been done without, as Dan says, the funding being sufficient to allocate in that way. I guess the other thing I want to say, just to not be completely rosy, is that there are challenges with the timelines with academia and with civil society, and we definitely encountered those challenges, but I think we were able to negotiate them partly because of the relationship, but partly because of the funding that allowed putting more resources to complete the academic work more quickly, to meet the timelines that were needed to get the things in place. And like one example is the Campbell collaboration. Mission is to promote positive social change through doing rigorous and comprehensive systematic reviews that take time. But because of the funding and the timelines, we were able to get 3 reviews started in this project, and I think they'll all be complete within the next 6 months. So it's quite quick for systematic reviews, and I think it's thanks to partly the motivation and the needs, so that the interest from Nutrition International for the information, and partly because the trainees and the funding allowed the work to get done.
That's great. I see that there's a question here about kind of human resources, but I don't want to lose this thread around some of those challenges. And I think maybe, Charles and Katrina, from the CCGHR perspective, you might be able to come in on this because you work with, so many different research institutions through CCGHR, that also has a really strong commitment to emerging researchers, student researchers, and developing skills. But first, maybe to this question of challenges and the reality that those are there. Curious to know if there's any thoughts that you wanted to share on the challenges that you faced and kind of how you grappled with that. And then kind of the second piece being around this question of how do we develop the skills that we need to do this sort of work, because it isn't just being trained in one or the other, right? It's about the knowledge of multiple spaces. Maybe Charles first, did you want to speak to either the question of challenges or skill building?
Well, I'll try to address both those questions. CCGHR is, as everybody knows, a research-focused organization that supports knowledge generation and transfer. And our lab very much wanted to move outside that and to begin to look at partnerships outside of, say, a research collaboration. And we began to recognize when we reviewed the literature that the vast majority of partnerships are through NGOs, civil society, and are addressing, quite frankly, development and capacity building. And the other thing that became clear to us is that when we started this, we were thinking about north-south partnerships, but just listening to the panelists today, it's quite evident that issues of equity and power arise at all levels. Even within organizations, there will be partnerships and there will be issues of power. But also locally, here in Montreal, when I think about what we do with McGill, the big gorilla obviously is the university, and we have a real problem with thinking about how to go about partnerships locally or provincially, not just internationally, which we do, obviously, but these are very, very context specific, and there's no one formula for knowing, are we doing this equitably? But that was what we attempted to do. And we wanted this to be a tool that people could use, as I said, use it locally within your organizations or wherever those partnerships may occur. And in putting our thinking together on this, we identified, we started with over 2,000 articles on partnerships and eventually boiled that down to only 30 that we felt we could constructively use to begin to build and synthesize a tool that would be useful for organizations. In particular, and we wanted this very much to be organizations that are funded through Global Affairs Canada. We're very hopeful that this tool at the end of the day is a tool that organizations of global affairs will be able to use, and we will want to be in a position to support that. We did come up with sort of general categories, and I just briefly want to mention those and maybe a few examples of how we went about thinking about, are we functioning equitably? And we started with just governance and the processes involved in a partnership. And examples might be, as we've heard, did people sit down together and come up with goals for that partnership, which involved all partners and voices from all members? Does the partnership involve shared leadership? Is it just being led by one organization, or truly is the leadership being shared? The second category was just procedures and how we go about functioning within a partnership. And there it was important that all members of the partnership felt that what they were contributing was being valued. And another example would be that, we're really learning from one another. We've already heard that today, that, and as I said earlier on, it is that ongoing learning experience, which is so important, and listening to others and learning for others. The third area was progress and impacts that we're having. And by that, I don't necessarily mean, how many lives are saved or improved, what different differentials and disease outcomes may occur. But within a partnership, which is not a project, it's a partnership. We're talking about outcomes for the partnership, not a specific project. Did we benefit people outside that partnership? Wherever we are within, in particular in a low-income country, is this partnership only going to exclusively benefit the direct partner that we are working with, or is it really benefiting others? And we also wanted to think about within the partnership, what did this partnership provide in terms of opportunities, new opportunities and advancements of people's careers and engagement in global health, and bi-directional. That's not just in the low-income country, but also in those with all the power. Mm-hmm. And then finally, we did have a section on power and inclusion. And, really that kind of boiled down to, are all members feeling like they're contributing, and that it really mattered, that people recognize this, valued it, and let them know that it is valued. But I'll stop here, just to end to say, yes, I think it is quite a challenge to be able to know, are you functioning in an equitable way, and have you been, quote, successful in the marriage? It's an ongoing challenge.
For sure. Katrina, wondering if you would like to share any thoughts from what you've seen, particularly around this question of developing the skill set, because what's really striking me is that it is a unique skill set to be able to occupy these kind of roles. What are those skills? How do we build them?
Yeah, I think it is a unique skill set, and I think one of the challenges is that there are different ideas about the role of research in society, and different ideas about how it should serve or respond to questions, or where questions come from. So I think one of the skill sets starts with, in terms of the context of research, or how we learn together. Even if we just come back to a step, and how do we learn and work together towards a shared goal and an outcome? If research is in any way a part of that, and if universities are part of that, not all university programs focus on developing developing a skill set that has to do with partnering. They often are very focused on technical or methodological kinds of things that don't actually get at the very complex relational skills that are needed to engage with others, and to make sure that that people to whom the research is supposed to benefit have some sort of a voice in articulating or understanding even what the problems or questions might be. So I think there are ways to reimagine the role of research in society and in community, and to focus on developing those very relational skills. I think it helps when when we have space for careers. I think, Colin, you said it earlier that, people move. We don't always have to occupy one space. And so I'm a registered nurse by background. I've worked in very clinical settings. I've worked in street outreach. I've worked in administrative roles in health systems. I've worked as a knowledge broker. I do a lot of KT work. And I work in research. And I see these as very useful because I understand many different settings well, because I've worked in them, I've lived in them, I've spent time in them. So I think we could allow more nimbleness and flexibility for people to value having opportunities to occupy different roles. And if we are in a singular sort of space, to really take the time, which I think also has been mentioned several times, that good partnering involves time and willingness to listen and to really build that understanding of each other and to articulate and understand what are the equity kinds of issues, implications, and goals that we have as a group. All of this takes time to understand where people are coming from and what they bring. And I think the more that we can recognize that every person who is at the table, and even those that we haven't thought to include yet, have something really incredible to offer, the more we can develop our listening skills, our understanding skills, I think the more likely we are to have a good experience, and maybe we could call that a success.
Thank you, Katrina. Victoria, that was a big part of your role, was working with students that were involved with the program. And I know that you did a lot of that. And there was a question in the Q&A about, the partnership, manager role, and, it was, training and knowledge brokering a requirement. Wondering if you can comment a little bit more on what you saw and observed about the skills that were needed, and how, we as organizations, wherever we are, CSOs or research institutions, how do we support the development of that skills in our teams and in ourselves? How do we hire for that? How do we make sure that we've got the skills we need to make these partnerships work?
Yes, excellent point. I think based on my experiences on working with a variety of trainees or colleagues, or people who are well above me in terms of academic titles, and I think it's really making sure they see the entire project and goals as a whole, and not just the systematic review or the piece of research that they look at, but really how it all feeds together. Because I think that's really one aspect that for trainees and our students to really have more exposure to the project management, coordination, and how it all feeds into one another is very important. And it comes, over to the point that Katrina was making in terms of the softer skills and understanding the different audiences and how we could leverage, just being aware that actually it's not just one type of audience, but how can we adapt it to different types of audiences? And I think that's almost more important than the field experience, that, for many CSOs, finding field experience is kind of that golden trait, but it's really much more the openness to see how everything fits together and start brainstorming, understanding the different components, because I think that is the key driver to a lot of the successes that we're talking about. But also, it can be also a challenge if we're working with people with more limited experience with seeing the bigger picture and how we can move forward and see what are the smaller seeds we can plant from the get-go that may actually, as Colin mentioned, one of the things at the end of the day changed the data architecture for Nutrition International, for example. So I think it's not necessarily the hard skills, but it's much more the softer skills, understanding the entire project and having that exposure and being involved in those meetings and ongoing discussions that were really quite pivotal for the collaboration.
Thanks. Dan.
Yeah, just everything Victoria and others are saying. One thing I think it would be good to flag for participants is that part of the goals of our lab were really to make data more available for decision makers at every level within large nutrition and maternal and child health programming delivery settings. And so a number of things I think were very helpful for us in the way we did the work was we got a lot of local feedback and validation from teams, from partners at community level through NI's structures. And we also were very focused on creating ways to have data more accessible and more easily visualized and understood at various levels. And I won't get into all the complexities, but I mean, we kept that very much in mind. That was a big sort of overarching goal, was to make sure data were high quality, there was more, they were better, they were addressing key indicators more effectively, but also at the end of the day, they were being generated in faster real time and rendered available so that there was a more equitable use of these data. And I think that wasn't trivial. There was a fundamental equity goal built into our whole collaborative.
That's a really great point, Dan. And I want to make sure in the last few minutes that we have, we really talk about this question of our global partners as well. Sarah, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. We've talked in this hour about the Canadian partners and the Canadian partner experience. But as has been acknowledged, there are huge power differentials that exist within our own organizations and in the, internationally as well. Do you have any thoughts on how we work equitably with our global research and CSO colleagues, recognizing these power structures that have often traditionally undervalued local expertise or have not allowed local researchers to occupy principal investigator positions? Any thoughts on that?
That's big.
Yeah.
Big question.
And with a bang. Yeah.
Having worked in a number of countries worldwide, I know from very strong experience that researchers locally, and not just researchers, but those who are putting on programs are really, really critical or really, really interested in what's the evidence base. And so I sometimes think that Global North, we have in the past or sometimes thought that, well, we need to just spoon feed them. Whereas I feel like our partners in country are really interested in what we have to say. But we shoot ourselves in the foot when we say, you should just do this, and we don't consider what their perspectives are, and because they have incredible experience and things that I have done in the past that I thought were just so logical and they would be so perfect and everything would just go really well. And my local partners just said, no, that's just not going to work here. And so I kind of visualize this when we, as a Global North, as a partner in any partnership and any marriage, if we don't consider the other person, we're basically shooting off one of our legs. And then we're trying to work around with, hopping on one leg and not, and that sounds a bit, I think sometimes it helps to make it that stark, because we really have to remember that we all have that foundation is so critical. And without every perspective in there, we have sandy foundations. We don't have rock solid foundations. So that's my thoughts.
That's great, Sarah. We're coming to the close of our time, but just wondering if anybody else, and I'll make it open, would like to come in on kind of, and maybe we'll think of this as a springboard to the next conversation we need to have, because obviously we need our global partners in the room to be having this conversation meaningfully. But anybody who wants to kind of help, wrap up with some thoughts on this question of the local component to it, what do we need to be thinking? What do we need to be exploring next? when it comes to these, kind of power dynamics. Katrina.
Yeah, I would just say, I think this is such a critical point. And when we approach any work that we're doing from a position of knowing, then we really always risk not putting evidence into context and not situating it in the tacit and organizational and community and cultural knowledges that are so critical to understanding whether evidence works or is appropriate. So even when evidence is really compelling, its implications look really different in different settings. And so the more we can approach any of the work we're doing from a position of not knowing, but rather having some skill set perhaps to offer or some service that we could provide. And if we approach it from a position of willingness to listen and to learn, I think we can have a much more equity and evidence-informed way of working together to come up with solutions. And really, the world needs us to do this because our global futures are kind of precarious right now. And so we need to do this really well. We need to work together. We need to put brilliant minds and energies together so that we can find really adaptive solutions for really big challenges that we face. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you, Katrina. That's I think a fantastic thought to kind of end on. And what has really struck me, we have within the collaborative a lot of very technical conversations, and those are very important. But this conversation, I think, really gets at the heart of how we work, who we are as professionals, how we approach, how we work with each other, and the mindset that we bring to the work that we do every day, and that has a powerful influence on how successful we are. And the relationships that we build with each other. And we can put a lot of different things in place, but if we don't focus on how to build those relationships, how to work with each other, how to keep each other first and foremost in our minds, like we do with the important relationships in our lives, if we don't do that, we'll struggle to really achieve the goals that we have. And I am just so incredibly grateful that all of you took the time to reflect on your own experiences and both, to contextualize them in this broader question of partnerships, and then also to give some really specific examples for the skills we need to resource, the way we need to meet with each other and show up for each other, and how these very specific things are the lived or the manifested experience of the orientation that we have. I took a lot from this, and I think a lot that we'll want to build on and share in future. We're going to be sharing in the chat momentarily. We will be having other dialogues. So we invite folks to, if you want to be notified about when those will be, and if you want to be able to save your spot, please, put your name down, sign up there, and you can be notified about our upcoming labs and events. And you can also request if there's specific topics that you'd like to know more about, or if you'd like us to delve more deeply into these areas. And I'm going to conclude by just sharing my absolute gratitude to Colin, Charles, Katrina, Victoria, Dan, Vivian, and Sarah, who are representatives of the organizations behind them who did incredible work on these labs, both for your work in the collaborative and for sharing your thoughts and suggestions today. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us today. I look forward to seeing you in future upcoming dialogues. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.